We're being told that the trans movement, well, it's a movement that's looking out for the best interest of vulnerable, gender-confused minors and young adults, which is intended to affirm them just the way they are. But is that really the case? Or is there something the pushers of this grand scheme are hoping the public does not catch on to, in terms of financial and sexual predators using this man-made psychological ruse as a means of enriching themselves by exploiting the emotional vulnerabilities and untreated mental health issues of such young people? The reality of what is taking place is not a pretty one. In fact, it's downright nefarious. As it turns out, this movement is actually only benefiting those who are pushing it, at the physical, emotional, and psychological expense of the minors and young adults who've been groomed into an inner state of confusion where they're willing to endure significant pain needlessly, instead of simply being helped to accept themselves just as they are.
It's going to require another skin graft. One surgery, probably two.
How soon?
Could be as early as 2 or 3 weeks.
And where will that skin graft be from?
Dr. Ting has talked about the back of the thigh, possibly. But I'm always conscious about more scarring and then getting that graft to be something. That's going to be the second aspect of it.
I knew it was going to be a long process, but I didn't think it was going to go down like this and that I would need this third skin graft operation. You never know how hard or how painful the recovery process will be. I try to stay positive, but this news is just really devastating. So after all of that, how beautiful do you think my vagina will end up looking?
You know, it's a series of compromises from here. But I have assurances that we can make that look much, much, much better. Okay. But scar-free, no. Yeah.
Alex Aaron of the Gender Mapping Project is one of those protective voices who tirelessly is sounding the alarm about the dark reality of how the trans movement is targeting vulnerable young people for exploitation.
All of these young Gen Z people who are growing up on TikTok and Instagram and the normalization of this entire thing, who are going to go into adulthood still identifying as non-binary, and many of them will believe that they need to have surgical procedures in order to affirm that falsehood. So to affirm that false identity. And there are so many predatory surgeons ready to answer that call, right? Think about it. If you were to take a girl who's from the age of 12 to 18 and feed her messages every single day that she needs to get breast implants, what's she going to do when she turns 18 and she gets a credit card? She's going to get breast implants. And so it's very clear to me that you feed a population this type of garbage. They're obviously going to come out the other side and be incredibly vulnerable to this, to predatory kind of advertising.
We'll hear from Alex Aaron next on the Predator Watch podcast.
Predator Watch provides a brief overview of important stories in the news or issues of concern as they relate to understanding the nature of sexual predators, their characteristics, how their minds operate, their methods of manipulation, and what motivates them. They hide in plain sight, can smell an opportunity a mile away, and count on people not understanding just how dark their hearts are and how intent they are about always producing victims. Stay tuned as John Euler, a licensed professional counselor with over 25 years of professional experience treating both survivors and sexual predators, shares his insights on this edition of Predator Watch.
I am John Euler, and welcome to the Predator Watch podcast. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce who I consider to be a good friend now, somebody who is on the cutting edge of this fight, really the fight against deviance, and Alex Aaron. She just, off camera, she informed me that we sort of comprise what is becoming known as the Pervert Squad. And I laughed and I said, we're sort of like the Perp Squad then, and I'm happy to have that title. So Aaron, welcome back. It's long overdue. And I'm excited because we're going to talk about a wealth of information. But why don't you give a brief introduction? I will introduce you as the woman behind the Gender Mapping Project. You have taken on a Herculean task to really catalog and prepare in a very user-friendly fashion for parents or others a means of, at their fingertips, a means of finding out where these diabolical transgender medical professionals, I use that term loosely, these are doctors that have no ethics. These are doctors that are diabolical because they are slicing off the healthy body parts of mental health patients who happen to be young, and they're manipulating them. So talk to us about, how did you get involved in this? What is the passion behind this? And then we will launch into a series of different important points that you're not only passionate about, but that the general public and parents need to know about. So give us the background story. How did you get into this? Why are you passionate about this? And then tell us about the Gender Mapping Project, and then we will look at some of your most recent. You have a podcast and you have a blog, and talk to us.
That's right. Okay, great. So my main focus coming into this is I come from a place of anti-prostitution, anti-pornography, increasing awareness about the Nordic model. And this issue kind of just sort of falls into your sphere if you're doing anything really related to women, or if you're commenting or creating commentary about the dangers of pornography in children. You simply can't escape this entire transgender quote unquote issue. So we're often told things like nonsense terms, like we're told there's no abuse on Pornhub, right? So we had to come back and we have to say the facts. We have to say, no, there were 59 documented cases of child abuse on Pornhub over the last year. And we have to speak the facts so that it can cut through a bit of the nonsense. And a lot of the time I'm told by many people that nobody is performing genital surgery on children. And I find that to be quite an insidious term and quite an insidious lie, because we know that there are multiple surgeons that will do these procedures. So what I've done is I've actually cataloged them by state, by location, by city, by country, to actually say to people, just recently, I'll give you an example of this week. Governor Abbott in Texas is trying to put some enforce laws on the books about child abuse, and declaring that so-called transgender surgeries will now be declared as child abuse. And many people have come back at him and said, well, there's no need for this. There's no need for this law because nobody is performing surgery on minors. So it was very important for Governor Abbott to actually say no. The names of them are the Crane Center and, this one in Dallas and this one in Houston. So you can come back and actually speak the facts and say, no, I actually have recorded conversations. I actually have documentation. I have pictures. So either these surgeons are pretending to do surgeries on minors or they're doing surgeries on minors. And then, of course, you always get the people who tell you, well, who cares that they're doing surgeries on minors, because these surgeries are life-saving. That's one of the lies that you're told. The first time I ever heard that lie was actually Marcy Bowers, who is an AGP doctor who performed Jazz Jennings' penile inversion surgery, which obviously has gone on to be a complete disaster. So that surgeon, who is a man who pretends to be a woman and has pretended to be a woman for years, a heterosexual man, an autogynephile, he's one of the first ones, kind of the pioneers of the lie, that if these children don't get access to dangerous interventions like penile inversion surgery, like double mastectomy, that they actually will kill themselves. And, this is of course, not anything that has any bearing in reality, because we see now.
Alex, let me jump in here, because we might as well, we're going to stir the waters anyways, and we need to.
Yeah.
So here's what I want people to understand, and then you comment, is that for any guy, so you've referenced these surgeons who are now portraying themselves as women. Men, male surgeons who've become women who are now performing surgeries on boys to become girls.
Yeah.
Okay. What people need to understand is this. Behind the scenes, these are very deviant adult men who happen to be in the field of medicine, who have saturated their minds in porn. No man gets to a point where he thinks it's reasonable to get into women's underwear, their dress in women's underwear, cross-dress without saturating himself in hundreds, if not thousands of hours of porn, regardless of his job or profession. If you have a man then that starts to consistently cross-dress, he's doing so for a reason. If he's interested in trying to gain access or be around children, you then take an adult man who is so saturated in porn, who happens to be a surgeon. The question is, why is he trying to get his hands on children's bodies to transform them into the opposite sex? It is because he's taking a deviant sense of satisfaction, or he's deriving a deviant sense of satisfaction in transforming that kid, who will then go on to be easy prey for perpetrators.
Can we take a look?
Yes.
Can we examine
let's do
you?
the examination.
Okay. This needs to advance more because we're off center.
This has to come down here.
I mean, this is off center. See, this is tilted. So that in order to get this midline, we need to bring that down more, and that will centralize this.
I think we're saying the same thing. I'm happy. I have a good sense of what we need to do. Let me just take a picture, too. Poor thing. You could be a porn star for all the photos we've taken.
Yeah. I mean, so the ones that come to my mind, of course, is Marcy Bowers, the doctor who performed the surgery on Jazz Jennings, the disastrous surgery, actually, on Jazz Jennings. And then, of course, I think about the most powerful autogynephile in the medical field, which is, of course, Secretary of Health Richard Levine, who is a man who pretends to be a woman full time and has done for many, many years. And I found it really chilling, actually, when he was being interrogated, or really just questioned quite politely, by Rand Paul about some of these transgender interventions. And Dr. Levine really had no comeback. He really had no explanation. He just continually said, transgender medicine is complicated. And Rand Paul said, well, do you think that children can consent to puberty blockers and genital surgery? And he came back and he just said, transgender medicine is complicated.
American culture is now normalizing the idea that minors can be given hormones to prevent their biological development of their secondary sexual characteristics. Dr. Levine, you have supported both allowing minors to be given hormone blockers to prevent them from going through puberty, as well as surgical destruction of a minor's genitalia. Like surgical mutilation, hormonal interruption of puberty can permanently alter and prevent secondary sexual characteristics. The American College of Pediatricians reports that 80 to 95% of prepubertal children with gender dysphoria will experience resolution by late adolescence if not exposed to medical intervention and social affirmation. Dr. Levine, do you believe that minors are capable of making such a life-changing decision as changing one's sex?
Well, Senator, thank you for your interest in this question. Transgender medicine is a very complex and nuanced field with robust research and standards of care that have been developed. And if I am fortunate enough to be confirmed as the Assistant Secretary of Health, I would look forward to working with you and your office and coming to your office and discussing the particulars of the standards of care for transgender medicine.
The specific question was about minors. Let's be a little more specific since you evaded the question. Do you support the government intervening to override the parent's consent to give a child puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and/or amputation surgery of breasts and genitalia? You have said that you're willing to accelerate the protocols for street kids. I'm alarmed that poor kids with no parents who are homeless and distraught, you would just go through this and allow that to happen to a minor. I would hope that you would have compassion for Kira Bell, who's a 23-year-old girl who was confused with her identity. At 14, she read on the internet about something about transsexual. She thought, well, maybe that's what I am. She ended up getting these puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones. She had her breasts amputated. But here's what ultimately she says now. And this is a very insightful decision from someone who made a mistake but was led to believe this was a good thing by the medical community. I made a brash decision as a teenager, as a lot of teenagers do, trying to find confidence and happiness, except now the rest of my life will be negatively affected, she said, adding that the medicalized gender transitioning was a very temporary, superficial fix for a very complex identity issue. What I'm alarmed at is that you're not willing to say absolutely minors shouldn't be making decisions to amputate their breast or to amputate their genitalia. For most of our history, we have believed that minors don't have full rights and the parents need to be involved. So I'm alarmed that you won't say with certainty that minors should not have the ability to make the decision to take hormones that will affect them for the rest of their life. Will you make a more firm decision on whether or not minors should be involved in these decisions?
Senator, transgender medicine is a very complex and nuanced field, and if confirmed to the position of Assistant Secretary of Health, I would certainly be pleased to come to your office and talk with you and your staff about the standards of care and the complexity of this field.
Let it go into the record that the witness refused to answer the question.
So I find it really troubling how many of these guys are involved at the highest levels of health, whether that's WPATH, or whether that's, Richard Levine, or even at the heads of organizations that are supposed to be safeguarding young people, very vulnerable young people. And again, with this, that we know so much how prevalent shemale porn and sissy porn and all of this underground is.
And if people want to learn about sissy porn, they can go back. I'll make a plug for our previous interview, which was a 3-part series on unmasking the dangers of transgender health. You went into detail, and we have a lot of pictures in there on what sissy porn. You educated me. I think I had seen it all and heard it all, and I've heard a lot having worked in prison, working with sex offenders, but you are a wealth of information. So if people want to know, and I'll link this at the bottom of this interview, I'll link to that interview, that 3-part interview that you and I did. If people want to learn about what the sissification process is, they can find that out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, John, I think it's really important for us to mention something that just happened in the last couple of weeks with regards to not just sissy porn, but actually we're now going into nullification porn. I wrote an article that was reporting on a group of men who got together in a apartment in London and castrated each other. And this was part of an online fetish community known as Nullos.
Okay, so I'm going to have you. We're going to take another step to start at this, but what I want people to understand here. Okay, so this can make sense. Is while I was conducting sex offender treatment in the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, I was on site staff for 11 years. The topic of castration, chemical castration, came up within the sex offender group, and the majority of sex offenders who did not have child victims, you could tell their eyes got big. They recoiled from this idea. It was very interesting to watch this. So it was being floated in the legislature, apparently, or at least in the newspaper, that this was possibly going to be a solution to overcrowding.
Wow.
So the idea of chemical castration now became a topic for a day in group. And the first thing that struck me was that we had the majority of sex offenders that recoiled from the very thought of undergoing castration as a condition of early release. There was a certain group of people, the most deviant of child sexual predators, the most deviant, the sexually violent predators, that had children as victims. They began not just entertaining it, but they actually said, "Oh, I'd go through this." And so 3/4 of the room, they were looking at it like, "Oh my gosh." That's when it really hit home. And so what people need to understand, and therefore what will set the stage for how you're going to what you're going to describe now, is that when a man becomes deviant, okay, there's a process, a stair-step-like fashion downward, like a terrace. Like in China, they grow rice in terrace-like effects. Okay, there's a stair-step fashion downward that starts with lust. Then it moves to manipulation. You're already now into objectification. Then it moves to deviance. When a man becomes deviant, everything becomes inverted, and it is no longer about hormones. So therein lies the lie that sex offenders are motivated because of their testosterone. It has nothing to do with testosterone. Okay? They will invert things. They move beyond power and control. And as this is happening, the age of their desired attraction becomes lower, down to, and it all converges at what they call barely legal. And the difference between the child sex offender and the adult sex offender is the adult sex offender, they all end up at barely legal, but the adult sex offender will back away from that. The child offender will move beyond that, and it actually shocks the adult sex offenders, those that have adult victims. No man gets turned on by a child's body. That's the lie. No man was attracted to a child forever. That is a lie. They always start with being attracted by adult bodies, and they move downward as they're becoming the most deceptive and the grandest of all liars. So for us to think that we're getting definitive information by interviewing a sex offender number one, but a child predator, and we take at face value that they've been attracted to children forever. MAPS, minor attracted persons.
Right.
That is a lie. So when an adult gets to a point where he's chopping off his own body organs, what it means is his mind is so saturated with porn, those guys are going to go back that night and still watch porn. And they become the most dangerous for kids. So as you're going to describe this again, I want people to understand how many thousands of hours it takes for a man to get to a point where he is now abusing himself. That's why autogonophilia, that term is simplistic to me. No, what you're dealing with is extreme deviance where they're getting off on themselves and visioning other women. People need to understand that, because those are the guys that are trying to access women's locker rooms by joining swim teams. And so by the time you have these men, so pick it up from here, these men that chop their own organs off, people need to understand these are really, really predatorial men by that time.
Absolutely. And well, I'll just take you back to these. So these guys were in London, and they joined what's called the online Nullo community, where they fantasize about being castrated and in many cases actually cannibalizing themselves. And they met up in London and they were arrested, and their whole kind of underground world was revealed. And I heard so many people say, oh, this is terrible, this is crazy, this is bad. I'm like, this is not surprising. I've been watching this non-binary or nullo fetish for a very, very long time. And what's even more frightening is that if you have this dangerous fetish where you are so saturated in pornography and so saturated in deviance that you want to actually chop off your penis and testicles. But if you, in many places in the United States and actually around the world, you can actually get that surgery done. And instead of calling it instead of calling it the castration surgery, they call it non-binary surgeries. And they're doing this in places like Align Surgical in San Francisco is one place that does it. And there are dozens of places that do it. And instead of these surgeons receiving these patients and saying, this guy wants something very bizarre done to him, very dangerous done to him, very unnatural done to him. Maybe I should get him some help, or maybe I should find out, like, is this guy got some other kind of problem? Instead, these guys are going in and saying, I have a nullification fetish. I want to be this particular non-human thing. Please turn me into it. And they're saying that's no problem. Hand over your money and we'll do it. And this is mainstream. Okay. The men in London who got together and did this, that was just a story that was good because I was, trying to say, no, this is happening everywhere. But think about the how warped all this has become. It used to be, just these autogynephiles need to have some of these surgeries to make themselves feel better, blah, 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 blah. We're now in a situation in 2022 where you can have non-binary nullification done at a surgeon's office in the West, right? This isn't being done on the dark web. These are normal surgeons operating.
Oh, okay. Barry,
lost you for a second. Sorry.
That's okay. We'll pick it back up. So you were saying these are not back alleys or in the dark web.
Yeah.
But in mainstream.
Yeah. So these surgeons are not they're like I say they're not on the dark web. These are not like back alley surgeons. This has been done in plain sight. This fetish is being allowed to be normalized and profited on in plain sight in many, many places around the world. And I see so many people going into this new line of quote unquote non-binary surgeries that I really worry about. Who are these men that are requesting this particular procedure? Because they're obviously coming from such a place of porn saturation and deviance.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Alex, this is so crucial because the overarching concern is young people with severe mental health issues that are being untreated, the vast majority of whom have already been sexually abused. The vast majority also are on the autism spectrum, so autism spectrum disorder. They are being groomed or have been groomed, and then the social contagion. That is what comprises the majority of the trans movement, these kids that are now taking hormones and undergoing surgeries. I've seen more and more pictures of young girls that have gone through, we used to call them sex change surgeries. Okay, so have gone through transgender surgeries, so have had their breasts removed, double mastectomy. So cults toy with language. These doctors toy with language. It used to be that doctors were very precise when it came to language. Now they toy with these things. I've seen more and more pictures where there is significant scarring, self-injury. It's clear that these kids, these girls, can be boys as well, but these girls have been slicing on themselves prior to surgery. So there's plenty of evidence, plenty of red flags. There are 9 key red flag clinical indicators that any professional should know. They should be able to rattle those off right now. They fast track these kids. They have to actually, I have a couple of pictures that it's clear that to slice off a girl's breast, you had to slice through past scarring from self-inflicted injury. So you have kids that are severely damaged. Those are girls. So now you have all the more a young man that comes to this doctor. And what you're telling us is this, that this is not a normal request. Doctor, chop off all my sex organs. So the doctor isn't going to send that kid, and this is my grievance with WPATH, and they're cowardly. I spoke about WPATH, who's the World Professional Organization. Within 6 days of me starting to question them on Twitter, suddenly I'm suspended for life. Very telling. I invited them onto my podcast on Friday nights, my live podcast, to talk about the screening procedures that they recommend. And what are they going to do about doctors that clearly slice off body parts of kids that have self-inflicted injury? And suddenly, within 24 hours, actually, I was removed from Twitter. So pick it up again where you just left off. So those doctors will receive a young male who is clearly a victim. He's steeped in porn, but that's how the kids are groomed. So you can have a victim that is steeped and saturated in porn. So you're telling us that this young man comes to a doctor, says, I want you to fully castrate me and chop off my penis. Yeah. And the doctor will comply with this request without sending him for mental health treatment.
Yeah, absolutely. So the place that I always come back to, the Crane Center, because I've actually heard him say it. You know, I've actually heard Dr. Crane say it, that he doesn't have any moral qualms about performing non-binary surgery. He doesn't seem to, he says it on video. He doesn't see that really it's a problem. And the other group of surgeons that I'm thinking about operate a clinic outside of San Francisco, which is called Align Surgical. And they do all of these types of surgeries. It really is not clear to me sometimes what they're trying to achieve with some of these procedures, because I've seen people who have had holes drilled into them. I've seen people who have had their penis removed, their testicles removed, and everything sort of sewn up. And this is shown on their websites. They're not ashamed of what they're doing, but 99% of the world sees this and is horrified. And as well, I just want to say that non-binary is now the most popular way to identify for young people, right? Young people that identify on the LGBTQ blah, 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 blah spectrum, the vast majority are identifying as a third gender, right? So non-binary, agender, polygender, demigender, all of these things, right? So they're actually wanting to identify out of the so-called gender binary. And, at the very beginning, 5 years ago, or even 10 years ago, one could say, oh, this could be relatively harmless, right? Because maybe this is just the new goth or the new emo, right? It's a new thing. Okay, I'm non-binary. But when you're taking it into a medical conclusion, right? When you're taking it, these kids that are identifying as non-binary because they've read about it on Tumblr, or they've read about it on social media, or they have a bunch of friends who are identifying as non-binary,
or through their school, Soji Sex Ed, the sexual orientation and gender identity sex ed. Yes. That's what's being pumped into schools. Parents had better get involved, because this is a locomotive that's going full speed. they had better start looking at the sex ed curriculum. It's called SOGI Sex Ed, and this is where they're getting these kids on this train, and this is where these kids are heading towards. Ultimately, sterilization and amputation.
Yes, and even I can't escape this non-binary thing, because I turned on the latest rendition of Sex and the City. I'm not really a fan, but it used to be a relatively kind of benign nonsense kind of series, not particularly good. But they revamped it for the 2021-2022 audience. And the first thing I am inundated with is a non-binary female, they, them character, okay, who all she's done is she's got a haircut, right? It's ridiculous that they're using this term. But more concerning is that they actually had a non-binary child, 12 years old. And
which means the child has been groomed.
Yes.
Has been emotionally and mentally groomed to not view and understand male or female distinctions, biology 101.
Yeah. Well, it seemed to me that in the way that the Sex and the City was portraying this non-binary storyline for the 12-year-old, it seemed to me as if they were kind of just playing around and not really getting it. But I was like, this is so sinister, because there's so many mothers, so many millennial mothers, right? So that's my generation, who are going to see this and they're going to think, oh, this is not something I need to be concerned about. This is fine. It's being normalized through Hollywood, very much so. And again, if this was just about cutting your hair and wearing clothes, no one would care. Okay, we're talking about medicalizing this particular identity. We're talking about removing breasts for this identity. We're talking about procedures like phallus-preserving vaginoplasty, which is where a man will keep his penis and actually get a hole drilled into him because he feels non-binary. So this is not a benign phenomenon, not at all. A lot of people tell me, well, what's the harm, non-binary? Who cares, gender, da-da-da. No, we're not talking about cross-dressing. I don't care about cross-dressing, right? If a woman wants to cut her hair, who cares, really, you know? But this is medicalizing. What is essentially a porn-fabricated identity, which has become mainstream through internet culture and internet pornography and YouTubers.
You just nailed it. Okay, let me rephrase, because I still think you're being polite. Okay, maybe because I get all energized. Okay, whoever's listening to us, let's say parents, what they need to understand is this. Even though we've been called, the pervert patrol and the perp patrol, and I'm good with that. Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah.
But you and I we've never spoken about adults, in their own lifestyles. That's not our concern. What an adult wants to do, I have opinions, but I don't talk about those opinions because that's not my focus. My focus on my end, and Alex, you are coming from a safety perspective of women and children. I'm coming also from a clinical therapeutic perspective that cares about the mental health of people. And I've worked with kids in the system extensively. Mm-hmm. A lot of the perps attempt to minimize my experience. I've worked with and created an adolescent treatment facility from the ground up. I've worked with the hardest of cases of severely emotionally disturbed kids. Mm-hmm. I've worked with sexual abuse survivors, and I have worked with sexual predators. So I really understand the full spectrum of everything I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. So our concern is that you have both financial and sexual predators and those that are interested in changing society. But you have people that are driven by monetary motives, so greedy people and sexually deviant people that have designs for getting their hands on the private parts and private spaces to commodify and satisfy the adults deviant designs so that their target audience are these kids. This is mass marketing. And the end result is you will screw a kid up forever. You will not only sterilize them forever. So this is classic eugenics on the one hand. On the other hand, you are massively screwing up an entire generation of kids that will never be the same. That is our concern. And you're speaking to that perfectly.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I wrote recently about this whole phenomenon about non-binary and non-binary surgeries. And if you today just put in non-binary surgeries into Google, you will see paid advertisements that are trying to sell to you non-binary surgeries or gender affirming surgeries with a whole different type, a whole list of providers here. So, this is a big money-making scheme for many of these doctors. There's no way in my mind that a doctor can truly believe that removing turning somebody into a smoothie, is what they call them, or a nullo, is truly serving their best purposes. All you need to do is just take a little look into these guys' lives, into these young men's lives, and they're in deep trouble. They really are. They're struggling in some capacity in their lives. And I haven't yet been able to find anybody who's doing the female non-binary genital surgeries, but I'm terrified about it. I really am. What procedure could they possibly do? It makes me quite terrified, actually, that they're going to have to address this market. All of these young Gen Z people who are growing up on TikTok and Instagram and the normalization of this entire thing, who are going to go into adulthood still identifying as non-binary, and many of them will believe that they need to have surgical procedures in order to affirm that falsehood. So to affirm that false identity. And there are so many predatory surgeons ready to answer that call, right? Think about it. If you were to take a girl who's from the age of 12 to 18 and feed her messages every single day that she needs to get breast implants, what's she going to do when she turns 18 and she gets a credit card? She's going to get breast implants. And so it's very clear to me that you feed a population this type of garbage, and they're obviously going to come out the other side and be incredibly vulnerable to this, to predatory kind of advertising. Gallagher is the one that I mentioned, who advertises openly. Dr. Gallagher is a surgeon in Miami who advertises openly on TikTok.
Holy fucking smokes, dude. My cut is insane. Shout out to my barber, dog.
It's also the fact that when people are doing things like ideological eugenics, right? That's like a government thing. It's horrific and it's awful, but to do it for your own greed, to do it for your money so that you can have a yacht as she has, or so that you can have a nice apartment as she has. Is there anything sicker? Really, this is a person who has not been forced by a regime to perform these surgeries. She is not somebody who's in China having to perform these surgeries otherwise she's going to get killed. This is someone who has woken up and made a conscious decision to make a career out of destroying the bodies of females, of girls who are very distressed. She boasted about removing 1,000 pairs of breasts in 2020. She boasted about it. How sick do you have to be? She boasted about removing 1,000 pairs of breasts in 2020. She boasted about it. How sick do you have to be? I just can't. And I feel to myself, the outrage which is going to come in the future from Dr. Gallagher is really around the corner. Greg Abbott, I don't know anything about his politics, but he's woken up to this. The Attorney General's woken up to this in Texas. It will not be long before the Attorney General in Florida wakes up to this, and I hope they chase her very far away.
We'll have to stop at this point due to time constraints, but be sure to join us for part 2 of this interview with Alex Aron, as she describes how those who've awakened to how they were manipulated and exploited by this grand deception, well, they're finally speaking out about their stories and about how these diabolical doctors are willingly taking advantage of such young people. We'll continue at this point with Alex Aron on the next edition of the Predator Watch podcast.
You've been listening to Predator Watch, dedicated to shining the light of truth about the nature of the most sophisticated of sexual predators most likely to target places where victims are most easily accessed. For John Euler and the entire team, thanks for listening.
Predator Watch has been sponsored by SurvivorSupport.net. As a non-profit organization, Survivor Support is dependent upon the generosity of people who believe in its mission of supporting survivors. Please consider becoming a monthly supporter of this important work.